Welcome to the Man Down Podcast. We are here to fuck up your life in the very best way. We're here to give you good advice from people who have long life experience in all different areas, who are generally pretty lovable and pretty smart and thoughtful about a variety of topics. Today, we're going to talk about self worth, also self confidence, and arrogance. How do you know when you're veering into the arrogant side? How do you build these systems to be more confident about yourself, your opinions, your achievements? And how do you ground that in a space of self worth so that you can face what's a really tough world these days with not necessarily impunity, but the ability to evaluate all of the opinions, take on the good ones, get rid of the bad ones, and continue to progress in your life? Stay tuned. Welcome to Manos de Piedro. Today, we are discussing confidence, arrogance, and what you should do to become a better person in life. We went from Mexican accent, Sábado Gigante, to a little bit of Russian, as we do.
This is the thing. I was just like, I can't interrupt because I do want to see where this goes. Like, how many accents is it gonna go through? It's like, when you hear an Australian start a word and then
Are you
every
South
vowel
African?
comes in.
Are you Australian? Are you?
Yes, they're like, no. It goes through all of the vowels. I was really intrigued to see where you were gonna go. Like, by the end, we'd have been in some new territory, some new human domain.
I've been in the UK for 15 years, and everything just gradually morphs into Russian. I don't know why. It's just the way that things work. I guess it's like all of the finances here eventually morphs into Russian. So we want to talk about confidence, arrogance, and self-worth, baby. And I'm a little spiky about this because I've been dealing with this bullshit for a long time, partly because I'm an American who lives in England, and partly just because people are often wrong about this topic. So Patrick and I wanted to tuck into it because either you might need to learn how to be more self-confident, where it's useful to get kind of the right vibe and attitude to go forward with, or you might be hearing that you're an arrogant asshole and you might want to check in with yourself to find out, am I really that type of person or am I simply misunderstood?
Okay, so I guess what we're talking about today is a topic both like close to both of our hearts. I think that both of us have had our experiences with being labeled arrogant in our
Mhm.
other life as football commentators, where obviously you are going to get a certain number of poorly motivated people, I would say, who dislike what you're saying. And so they say that it's not really that they dislike what they're saying. It's not really that they can't take criticism of their favorite club. It's that the problem is that your delivery system is all messed up. But perhaps it's worth defining our terms at the beginning, I suppose, because today we are going to talk about these three things that are interrelated but are not quite the same, right?
Yeah.
So self-worth, let's start with that because I guess that's the most foundational. So that to me, I would define that as believing that you're valuable, believing you're worthy of respect, believing that you matter. It's how you see yourself. Then confidence is really how you act based on self-worth, right? So it's acting in accordance with those beliefs, acting like you have something that's worth hearing to say, acting like you might have something to contribute. That's, I think, what we would call confidence. It's kind of the outward show of self-worth. Then arrogance. Arrogance, I think, is quite hard to perfectly define. I think that quite often people describe it as overconfidence. And I think in some ways that's true. It's a kind of false confidence, right? It feels like it's confidence where you're disregarding the achievements of others or the contributions of others to your own success, or you think you're better than you are. There's something there where your confidence is kind of jutting out over its foundation. There's nothing really shoring it up. But arrogance is also just really something that we say when we feel like somebody's a little bit smug and a little bit full of it. So, with that in mind, shall we talk a bit about what's prompting us to discuss this today? Because something pissed you off last week on the football side, and it pissed me off as well. Um, but I think that the way that you responded to it really highlighted some of the differences between confidence and arrogance, and I thought that would be a really fruitful place for us to return to as we go through today's episode.
There may have been times in my life where I have been a little bit arrogant about things. And
Okay.
in this case, arrogance would be an unwarranted amount of self-belief or an overinflated sense of self-importance about something. And we all know people in our lives who've been like this. But in many cases, I live in England, but I'm an American. And my accent is initially a problem. Like I get judged simply when I open my mouth and the words come out in this particular accent.
Sure.
And then, Americans are often viewed as loud, brash, arrogant, sometimes overly self-confident if they wanted to adjust it. And in English culture in particular, like this is a problem. This has been a problem because you have been in this culture for a long time. How do the English feel about this? And also, like many different cultures, either mirror the American side or mirror the English side. And so there is a natural culture clash when you cross borders and go into these spaces.
Um, yeah, the British think that talking about your achievements is arrogant in itself.
In itself.
Yeah, there's not really a distinction made between whether you are actually good at something and whether you're bullshitting about being good at it. If if I went and talked to somebody about how amazing I am at Latin and like what how incredible my Latin is, then people would think I was arrogant, even if I could back that up. So it clearly is an attitudinal thing for the British, and I think there's a degree of envy about it as well. You know, Americans feel like they are willing to argue for themselves. I think what the British maybe don't see is that American corporate culture in particular is much more cutthroat, as far as I could tell. And so you do have to be an advocate for yourself.
There you go.
And if you haven't really had to do that, then you will see any kind of self-advocacy as self-involvement. But the British, generally speaking, are allergic to this in the same way that they're allergic to being direct about stuff. It's the same reason they think the Dutch are rude. The Dutch can be a bit rude, but also the Dutch are just blunt, and the British who have it's like the chief pastime of the British is circumlocution. They don't really want to get into this. So I really don't envy you as an American in the UK because you are dealing with a specific prejudice that I think is both about things Americans do and is just about the fact that they are American.
Well, and mine was multi-factor, right? So like I'm an American, and then I'm an American talking about football, and then
Mm,
an American talking about football and like stats and data, which is like, one level removed from football that they're already like deeply uncomfortable with. And so there are all these factors that are kind of working against me. But I'm also, for those of you who don't know, my history is I was a professional sports bettor like way back in 2005. Then the United States changed their laws, and I ended up working for one of the world's largest offshore bookies. We started live betting back in 2008 across American sports and soccer slash football, completely revamped their product suite from 2007 to 2014. So I worked there for about 8 years and took the profits at that company from minus 6 million in the first year to over 100 million in the year that I left. And it's probably continued on from that point. So I can tell you that I did not know how to do almost any of that when I started doing that, which is an interesting place to start this conversation.
And so in order to go from a position of not knowing to knowing, you had to recognize your shortcomings, right? And this was the point that you made when you wrote this newsletter in response to some of these criticisms. Your point was, I may be confident now, but it is based on the fact that I have been ruthless at extirpating my weaknesses, at going over my failures and figuring out where I messed up. And I do think that that sort of humility is completely incompatible with arrogance.
That's interesting. So I mean, I we haven't talked about this at all. So I don't know like
No.
what your response to this has been. I know that you have been kind of a similar role in some of your football conversations and received this type of information from, people that wanted to criticize you either inside the industry, like inside the sort of video news football industry, or from people who just reacted poorly to your sense of, hey, I kind of know what I'm talking about. And I know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about because I've actually looked around at everybody else. I've done all the research. I've grounded myself in this information. And then I'm talking from that point of view.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely something that I've dealt with, and I think in my I guess in defense of my critics, at a certain point when I started out, I was just making claims, right? You've got to start out making claims, and then only over time can you say, well, if you think I'm arrogant, then go back and look at my history of making claims and see what
Mhm.
you think of it. Um, but it's also something that has just been around my whole life. Like I think when I was young, I always spoke quite confidently, and I was often called arrogant. And I think I dismissed that a lot because it felt like the people who called me arrogant were the people who didn't like me, and the people who called me confident were the people who liked me. And I think that to some degree that was correct, but I also think that it blinded me to some of my weaknesses at first. Whereas in the football space, I was always kind of like, the only value I have here is giving an opinion. And to me, it's more arrogant to say, I'm just going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm not even going to tell you what I really think, but I think I can dupe you by telling you what you want to hear. That to me is so arrogant. To me, I thought the only thing I've got going for me is that I'm going to be honest with you about what I think, even if it makes me look stupid later. So I always thought in the football space, I'm exposing myself. I'm exposing myself to ridicule, and then later on, I will be asked why I thought this stupid thing. So it always seems strange that moving into football, suddenly this conversation about arrogance was absolutely everywhere, inescapable. When I thought, if anything, I'm talking more about my failures now than at any point in my life so far.
Sure. And that's the thing. Like people will still label you with this label, even if you're being honest and actually showing exhibiting traits that are completely incompatible with the label itself.
Mm,
Because they don't care. They don't care to be right. They care to label you and to put you in a bucket in a category where they can find ways to discount and diminish your opinion.
mhm,
So for those of you who don't want to get into the silly newsletter thing and what happened on social media, which is totally fine. Basically, I said that I've been making sort of predictions about transfers for over a decade, and that I have been one of the best people in the world to do that, like most consistently over this long period of time. And you could potentially disagree with that, but also the people that I've aligned with are also among the very best in the industry, and employed is the very best in the industry. And we have many, many, many cases where we've overlapped on transfers that happened from the industry best people, or lots of other cases where I'm like, this is a terrible idea. Like this doesn't make sense for all of these reasons. And then that, carries forth and we get a timeline of, oh, this turned out to be a terrible idea. And it doesn't mean that I'm perfect because it's actually a very hard thing to do. Right? Predicting things at a moment in time and then how they're going to work out when, other people have lots of information on this stuff too. That's a competitive predictions market. And it's what we do in sports betting all the time. In sports betting, if you're winning 55% of your bets, especially on 50-50 wagers, that's amazing. Like that
mm,
is incredible. It makes you one of the very best in the world because everyone is trying to compete against each other to find the right side of the line and win the most money. In the football industry, it used to just be people that were talking heads that
mhm,
had experience in football, then telling you what they thought about a thing. And it turned out that transfers were the most popular, most interesting thing around the whole world because there's this element of newness. There's this element of how do I make my team better? There's an element of hope inside of that sort of
yeah.
in the season. And plenty of times, some of the backlash we got was about crushing people's hope. And they were very irritated about, like, well, how do you even justify your existence as a predictor of
Mm.
transfers? And I was employed as that. So, like, that was how I justified my existence. And now we run a newsletter based off of it. But what I got back from the internet, once again, despite the fact that I have this long pedigree of doing this, is that, oh, and your modesty is also one of your strongest features, which is a
Mm.
really snide way of saying that, like, you're quite arrogant about your ability to do this and that you tell everybody about it. Now, those of you who have ever done any sort of marketing
Exactly.
need to understand that telling people why you're great and why they should follow you and why they should pay attention is just part and parcel of your fucking job. And starting a new media entity where you are doing all of these things in public once again then forces you to one, tell people, hey, we actually are pretty great. Two, we have a long track record of doing this. Three, we can stand by that track record. We're not making this shit up. We didn't just add things to our CV. Like we've really done it. And then four, we're better than the other people in the industry at doing this.
Mm.
So you should pay attention to us. And we're not asking you to pay, although we might get some monetary recompensation from this in various ways. So this was like all part of this conversation. And it just comes back around to me being very irritated about having the same fucking conversation with people
Mm.
who just they don't care about your credentials. They actually just care about labeling you.
Well, and I think vote with your feet. Like if you don't like the way that we talk about stuff, that you don't have to listen to it. But I think you can see how constructed this conversation is, in that there are certain things that if you say them, people won't think you're arrogant, even though they are a form of self-praise. And then with other
Mhm.
things, they will. So if you talk about your abilities, then you're more likely to be labeled arrogant. If you talk about your qualities, maybe less so. So if you say, "Well, I'm a kind and decent and warm person," you're very unlikely to be labeled arrogant. But this is also self-praise, is it not? In the same way as saying, "Well, I've achieved this or I do this," which ultimately is kind of descriptive, or you would hope it is descriptive. Um, so I think confidence, the difficult thing here is when we're talking about confidence, to some degree, we're in the self-worth realm where we're talking about, your faith in your inner qualities, your inner value. And in some ways, we're talking about the kind of influencer, self-helpy type stuff, which is how do you go out in the world and project an image of success and achieve things. So you put a tweet in our Slack the other day. From I've got the poster here. It's the Do Lab, DULAB. I don't know who, like, how we break that down. But this person says confidence is a direct result of always believing you have options. If this thing doesn't pan out, you can do that other thing. If this thing doesn't align with your goals, you can do these other things. It enhances conviction. This feeling of abundance means you can give something your all without the fear of failure, creating perpetual hesitation. This is interesting to me. When you put it in our Slack, you said, I don't fully agree with this. Um, I'd like to hear what you disagree with, because it's not that I totally disagree with it. It's just that it doesn't feel like it's the whole picture, right?
So I felt like this person is kind of adjacent to the question of self-confidence and
Sure.
the searching for a plan B, a plan C, always having other options and creating optionality for yourself in your life and what you're doing. That is often a byproduct of self-confidence
Mm,
and kind of attacking problems from an interesting framework. But it's not self-confidence in itself, and it doesn't yield self-confidence. It's like, oh, I could do other stuff. Well, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that like I feel emboldened to take action on this thing that I've made this choice on. Like
mm,
this is the separation between the two. There were responses in that thread that basically said self-confidence is much more about finding the fact that you can adapt as you go. You can take on information, you can learn more, and then believing that eventually you can find the solution or the right answer.
mm.
And and the thing is, like they've conflated failure inside of this, but the reality is that self-confident people will fail all the time. We've talked
Yes.
in other episodes about how failure is just part and parcel of doing hard and interesting things. If you do hard and interesting things on a regular basis, you will have times where you fail. And maybe
Hmm.
over a long enough time horizon, you can eventually get to the point where you succeed. Like maybe you're James Dyson and are willing to go through thousands and tens of thousands of different types of prototypes to find a bagless vacuum. That's a form of mental illness, but it worked out really well for him.
Sure.
And in some cases, like that's also true. Like there's an obsession element and there's a self-confidence element. But for
Mm,
me, being confident usually has a couple of different factors, and you've outlined these as like a broader space in your early life, but it's really about understanding that I have the ability to learn. I have the ability to adapt to new information that I am learning. And then eventually I will find like a good or a correct solution to whatever the thing is that I'm doing, whether that's a job or a problem or a project or my life.
so I really like that. That I think addresses kind of my issue with this, because it almost sounds like, well, the confident person knows that if they fail, they'll have other options, and the person who isn't confident worries that if they fail, they won't have any more options. And I actually think that the person who's not confident worries about failure because that goes directly to the problem with their self-worth, right? Because they don't have this foundation for their confidence. They're scared of failure because it feels like it confirms their worst fears about themselves. Um, so that was the part of it that I felt was kind of missing here, though I think that we are, well, maybe having slightly different conversations, like to give this person the benefit of the doubt.
Mhm.
Um, so do you want to talk about like the where self-worth has its origins, or do you want to talk about like what you if you're if you're a confident person now, did you always have that? Were there times when it was really shaken? Where would you find the roots of it if you were to look back into your past?
I think it's an interesting question because when I look at myself, so I've been depressed a couple of times
Hmm.
in my life. Every time that I've been depressed, it's been something to do occupationally. And occupationally, for me, like probably has a very strong sense of self-worth. And in fact, I think it's tied into some stuff around my mentality and when I've had difficulties elsewhere as well. I need to be able to achieve things and feel like I'm achieving things in a professional sense. Relationships are different and they occupy a different space in my brain. Even if for many people, like having a more successful relationship is the more paramount value for them, and the occupation can have a backseat. That's not really how my brain worked, despite the fact that I'm like quite a romantic and I'm very sort of pair oriented person. So we had a recording we had to abandon because we had technical difficulties. But I I was telling the story about, for those of you who don't know, I started sports betting in like 2005, and I was a professional sports bettor with a couple of friends of mine. The United States changed their laws, then had to leave the country, and ended up working for one of the world's largest offshore bookies and completely revamped their product suite from 2007 to 2014. We were doing things like live betting on NBA, baseball, basketball, American football, and then soccer back in 2008. So like quite
Mm.
a long time ago. And we actually changed how the world bets on different sports, also including tennis, including esports. Then that company lost $6 million the first year that I worked there. They were profitable to the tune of 100 million by 2014 when I left, and then that's continued to sort of build on our work. Not to say I did it all by myself, and in
Hmm.
fact, I had no idea how to do that stuff when I started it,
Hmm.
which is quite interesting. Then I started working on Moneyball in soccer and worked for Brentford for a couple of seasons, and then built StatsBomb. And I'd done none of these things before I did them.
Hmm.
I sort of like dabbled in them. I practiced, I tested ideas, and then we just executed because I'm the type of person who literally throughout my whole life has decided I can just do things. But part of I can just do things is it's okay if I fail. It's
Hmm.
okay if I'm wrong because I can learn well and adapt and then hopefully figure it out in the end. And I didn't realize that that's an unusual mindset or that it's kind of weird, which probably left me to try these things out a little easier than I would have otherwise.
But that's the thing that I'm interested in, that idea that it's okay to fail. Because I think, when we're talking about self-worth, we are talking about achievements and achievements versus expectations, right? We're talking about the experience we've had of others, whether it's teachers or parents or siblings in early life. Obviously, there's a lot of social values as well that come into it. Like ideas about what the good body is or what an intelligent person should be like or whatever. Um, but you ended up with what we would call in therapy a core belief, which is my value is not determined by the outcome of this one thing.
Right. And that's super important, isn't
Mm.
it? Like, because if you get caught on that thing, like you don't control outcomes. We talk about this in all of our stuff, and this is a
Mm.
science related belief. You can control the process, but you cannot control the outcome. Life
Hmm.
is inherently random with variability. Like there's a lot of shit throughout your whole life that will always be out of your control. So in some sense, even if you don't recognize it, you are surrendering to whatever the outside execution of the process and of life is.
Yeah.
I would say that there's a little nuance though. Like it's okay to fail is a different way than I viewed it than failure is going to happen.
Hmm.
Failure is inherent in the practice of whatever you're doing. So in sports betting,
Sure.
if you win 55% of your bets, that's amazing. That makes you among the best in the world. That also means that you lose 45% of your bets. You are
Sure.
losing 4 out of 9. And so that's failing on a regular basis. And if you do this sometimes, you'll fail a lot in a row. Same thing with poker and same
Mm.
thing with Magic the Gathering. And so you get used to the fact that, like, part of the learning process is that I'm going to lose and I'm going to fail in different ways. How do I learn faster? How do I learn better? How do I do better? That is a slightly different way of saying failure is okay. I fucking hate to lose. Most
Mm.
people that learn to be successful hate to lose, but that
Mm.
doesn't mean that you won't lose. It just means that you fight really hard not to.
Hmm. Hmm. So the difficulty I think that people get into here is that they hear other people talk about their confidence, right? And they think, how do I get from where I am to there?
Mhm.
You know, how do I get to that point where I recognize that failure is inevitable and it doesn't it doesn't break the core of who I am. Um, but I think quite often when people talk about confidence, they're actually looking at something that's downstream of the real issue, and that they'd be better off thinking of it in terms of self-worth.
Mm.
Because again, it feels like otherwise your option, if you don't fix the self-worth issue, then what you're actually going to try and do is something more akin to arrogance, right? You're going to have to try and bullshit yourself into the confidence. That's never really going to work. It's especially not going to work if you're trying also to let people get close to you. So for example, if you're trying to date, it's going to be really hard to fake confidence. People are going to be able to tell that you're full of shit. Um, so so I guess when we're talking about low self-worth, it feels like some people might maybe not be able to tell that they have it. I think some people think that they think they're like, often people come into therapy and they say, I think I'm a pretty decent person. I think I've done pretty well in my career. And they talk kind of a good game
Mhm.
about self-worth. And then when we actually get into it, it turns out they're not going after things that they want. They're real people pleasers.
Yes.
They're letting people cross their boundaries again and again and again. When something goes wrong, they always blame themselves, which is not the same as taking ownership of your failures.
Right.
It's not the same. They might neglect their needs. Sometimes it can lead to depression as well. So there's all this stuff that I think people kind of ignore sometimes, and they just think about it as I just need to be more confident, as if that's a thing that you can just magic up in yourself. Whereas when you're talking, what I hear is somebody who, at a certain point, must have been told, even if you just told yourself, that this is the way things are going to be. Like some stuff you do is going to pan out, some of the stuff won't, but you have abilities, you have qualities, and those things will always be there.
Yeah, and I think that, I took a lot of control of my own education as a kid because my parents
Uh-huh.
were really busy and I had a handicapped sister. And so it was, and then I remember very distinctly having like bad coaches in different sports at times, like ones that told me the wrong things, and it impacted negatively impacted my performance. Like, for example, as a baseball player, as a pitcher, they're like, "Oh, you just need flexibility. You don't have to lift heavy weights or anything." This was like wrong. And in fact, what we found out years later was that lifting heavy weights helps you throw things really hard. And
Hmm.
throwing things really hard is the single most important factor in being a great pitcher, at least in the more modern baseball style. Um, so realizing at some point very early on as a kid that everybody was bullshitting,
Mm.
everybody was faking it to some degree, and very few people were actually experts in something, especially back then. Like there's the story of like the family uncle that is super arrogant and would always answer questions with like a degree of confidence that was completely unwarranted. That would often be
Mm.
like how they would describe it. And the question is always like, is that person arrogant, or do they just like feel that they can bullshit and can't help take every opportunity to do so? And we're not going to suss this out because it's a fake person, but realizing that most of the world was actually that way back in the day was a very illuminating experience,
Mm.
because what it tells you is that, one, I'm going to have to figure out a lot of things myself. And this is where you and I have often talked about going back to first principles, figuring out how something
Hmm.
works is actually very useful, even if it's time consuming, because it teaches you stuff that other people might have missed. And those things, like that, can be very profitable to you as well. And then two, realizing that like you have to be really careful about experts in snake oil, and you want to validate most of your experiences and your learning with actual experiments. And so those two things come back around to, if everybody else is full of shit in some way, or if
Mm.
they're just limited elements of expertise, then I'm pretty good. Like I'm willing to put in the time and energy. And so I can actually spin up to having some level of usefulness, even if it's not expertise, in a pretty fast way. That
Mm.
starts to build your own elements of self-worth. And same thing in school. Like if you're learning stuff and you're taking on all the things that someone's trying to teach you and you're getting pretty good grades, but you're doing it off of the back of whatever school's teaching you, you're doing a good job.
Hmm.
And maybe they're not teaching you like the highest level. Maybe you can move up sets or things like that. But you need to understand that like there's a lot of worth inherent in that. And I think in reality, school teaches you a lot about self-worth, not necessarily about
Hmm.
self-exploration, but it does give you the ability to kind of figure out where you're sorted and then be like, oh, I can achieve things if I go through the process. And the process is simply whatever school decides that you should be learning.
So part of what you're saying here, I think, is that being awake when it comes to other people, understanding that other people are also trying, failing, fucking up, bullshitting, um, can then help you understand that other people are people like you and that you can achieve things in the same way they have. Like, I guess that when we're talking about low self-worth, low is a relative term, right?
Mhm.
You're essentially putting yourself below other people. And part of the issue that I think we had when we started talking about football publicly is that people's reaction was, how dare you put yourself on the same level as these people who've played the game?
You've never
Um,
kicked a ball in anger.
yeah. And so recognizing that those people are not infallible. Like to me, I think part of the reason I came to that was because I was coming out of the late 2000s, having become an atheist at like 18. So a lot of the new atheism shit was still rattling around in my brain, right? And then I came into this world like where it felt like there was the appeal to authority was just happening constantly. It was like
Yes.
Alan Shearer knows about this because he's
Yes.
Alan Shearer, and I
Graham
was like,
Souness knows about this.
yeah. And I was just like, this is exactly the same shit I just came out of in the religious field.
I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in football gods either.
Yeah, exactly. I don't believe in Eric Cantona. So this was like, so I think, yeah, the part of it was thinking, why should I possibly be below these people? And that's what gave me the sense that I had the right to put my opinions out there as well. So where should we go from here then? Because I guess there are a few different routes we can go down. We could talk a bit more about arrogance and how you avoid slipping into it and what separates it from confidence, or we could talk about how we work on self-worth. Like, what do you think we should head to?
So I have thought about this a lot because it's part of my life. It's like it's interwoven with my interactions with the
Sure.
world.
Mhm.
And there are some things that I've discovered that I think are pretty illuminating for people. And you should take these as useful lessons if you think that they're valid. One is that no matter how much you achieve, people will move the goalposts on you if they want to, and then say, "Oh, but you haven't done that. But you haven't done that." And
Mhm.
they can constantly just keep moving stuff. They could disagree with, like, if you took it as a predictions market, they could disagree with three things very early on, and you could prove all three of those wrong. And then they would find three new things to disagree with, and three new things to disagree with. And they will do this forever. And what you have to realize is that you need to write down your goals and your predictions and then see if you're achieving them and use that as part of your process. So, what I did and what we did as a company at StatsBomb or as a group that worked inside of Brentford and Midtjylland was we would look at all the other predictions that we made around these players. And we would say, okay, how did this work out 1 year later, 2 years later, 3 years later? And we would say, all right, we missed stuff on that. How do we measure what this player does better or what he doesn't do better? What was he missing? And that became an important sort of process of information that it's basically a flywheel of info and predictions
Mm.
that you say, okay, this is what we thought at this time. This is the tools that we had at this time to do that. And this is what we learned. Um, it's about constantly trying to improve no matter what you're doing, right? And that is the way that you can start from zero on something and then just continually get better and start to take on skills. And then the remarkable thing about the world today is that you have access to so much information in the world. Like 30 years ago, we had so little information. We had almost nothing that was easily accessible, available, whether it's Wikipedia, whether it's all of the online courses, all this YouTube learning, tons of books, tons and tons and tons of writing. People write more than they ever have. Not necessarily useful things, but they write a lot. And a lot of people will write useful things if you can find them. So going back to that kind of concept and process then says, this is where we're starting. This is how I start to learn. And this is how I'm testing my learning, even when I'm outside of a school system, right? Even when I'm
Mm.
outside of the constant learning elements. I think that that starts to build your ability to take on new things. But the other thing that people will move the goalposts no matter what things you try. You have to find a base of understanding that is unique and objective to outside info, to outside feedback.
Mm.
You also find that there are many, many rich CEOs, people that have started businesses that have gone on to be worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. They have imposter syndrome. They have
Mhm.
achieved all the things that they were worried about, but they have imposter syndrome, which tells you that we're often fooling ourselves about everything that actually exists in the world. Because if you inherently have gone through from nothing and achieved all of this stuff and you still feel like you're an imposter, you must be wrong about this. And you've lived the life. So
Mm.
all these other people that are outside judging you and pushing back on things and saying, "Oh, but you don't know this, but you don't know that." It's all bullshit. You need to find some sort of baseline level of evaluating your knowledge, your skills, and your ability.
Mm.
That's how you get to the real point of, do I have some level of expertise? Am I an idiot? How do I learn more? How do I learn faster?
Well, and I think to put this in the emotional realm as well, you can still do it there too.
Mm.
Um, you can ask yourself whether you are a good friend. You can ask yourself whether you seem valuable to the people around you, whether people are willing to be around you even when you're not at your most fun. All these sorts of questions are also ways of assessing your internal qualities and recognizing your strengths too. What you said there about the flywheel of information, this is, I think, arguably the most important thing, which is that if you look as objectively as you can at what you get wrong and what you do right in every realm of your life, then when you're criticized for something that you stand by, you will find that it is easier to summon the strength to push back and to say, actually, no, I'm not going to take it from you that I was selfish in that instance. I know why I did that and I can defend it. And you also will not be probably as activated as criticism as you might be by criticism on the areas that you know you fall short because you already are working to improve them. You've already recognized your shortcomings there. So I think that having that honest conversation with yourself is extremely hard. Like a lot of people, they want to tend one way or the other. They want to forgive themselves for everything or they want to blame themselves for everything. But trying to find a way to assess what you do wrong and what you do right in your emotional life and in your relationships, I think is one of the best things you can do to improve your self-worth in the long run because it will help you set boundaries. It'll stop you excessively people pleasing. And it's also very, very hard to do yourself down when you know that you are good at something, when you've looked at it as dispassionately as you can and you've recognized that you're good at it. So that kind of stuff, I think, is really a building block of self-worth as well as confidence out there in the world doing things.
And in sports betting and transfer predictions, like you will be found out if you hold on to beliefs that are invalid. Like in
Mm,
sports betting, you'll lose a ton of money. It'll cost you.
yeah.
If you're not honest about a flaw that you have in your evaluation process, it will cost you lots of money. And so you
Mm,
just have to be brutally honest about it. Some of the best companies that I've worked in the gambling space, but also the trading space and the football space, it is an open space for ideas. Like the right way to go about it is that anybody can have a great idea. And what it does is it really gets rid of the concept of like true expertise because experts will take on new information and reevaluate it all the time. And in some cases, you'll be wrong about your framework for how you view the game. Maybe you learned something wrong from coaches that you've
mhm,
kept a hold of for a really long time, and you've not really examined it until something new comes in and forces that examination. And sometimes that newness is like, oh shit, this person is actually right. I hadn't thought about it. But when we reinvestigate the sort of the way that football works, this person is more correct than my old coach. So I've got to throw that out. And this is true across the entirety of world experience. But I will also say, when you look at the social media space, so much of social media is a pure teardown space. It's
mhm,
constantly tearing down every single thing about every single person everywhere. Right? Or the other way is it's constantly just giving a praise machine, right? Some people want to be able to push the button and get praise. Your abs look amazing. Oh my God, your ass looks so good in that pair of trousers. Those two things are both non-functional for finding more about the world, because if people just want to tear you down, they will find any reason that they can to do so, and it's not a valid source of information. It's also not a valid source of criticism.
mm,
Now, sometimes it will be, and sometimes you have to go through the very hard process of examining every piece of criticism. And so a lot of times early on, what I would do at StatsBomb is I'd throw a visualization out there or like a model output and talk about like, 4, 5, 10, 20 players. And then people would be like, ooh, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that. And like you're getting very fast feedback from the world
mhm,
that you can accept or reject. Plenty of times I rejected it because they were just clearly wrong or they didn't understand the purpose. Like sometimes the visualization is not for you. Like the quants that I'm very friendly with and that I was kind of one at the time, they'd be like, "Oh, why the hell are you doing a radar visualization? Like it's warped in all these different ways." And they would throw their basic knowledge of radars at you. But what happens was you can actually improve the process of radars and how they display information. And if you go to the extent that you've added a lot of science and a lot of thought to the design of this data visualization, you can create something that has real utility that actually gets rid of 90% of the initial objections that these people will have. And the ones that are really clever grudgingly admit that by the end of it. But there's always a new dude that's not really clever that hasn't examined this. So they think that their learning is paramount to
Mhm.
yours, despite the fact that you might have 5 or 10 years worth of knowledge on this. We even see it, people like talking shit about different products or companies, right? So there was something just yesterday where I saw that somebody's like, "Oh, Signal is going to add AGI in this way to their app at some point," and then some woman immediately responds, "Definitely not. Love you." Um, and the dude then like responds with like these objections of he's saying, "Oh, clearly they're going to do it for these reasons," and and the person who responded the initial time is like, "I'm the CEO of Signal. I'm telling you this is not going to happen." And and this is the level of arrogance and overconfidence of people commenting about stuff on the internet. And you have to
Mm,
realize that not all, but many of the people that want to tear you down are exactly that level. You should not pay any attention to them. Well, if you can't pay
mm,
attention to the noisiest place that you're getting feedback from, or you need to be really thoughtful about which criticism you accept and which you disregard, then you have to have some more objective way of taking on feedback in order to improve. And that's what we're talking about here. And that being honest about your qualities, being honest about your knowledge, being honest about your
mm.
relative level to everybody else is where you start to build self worth.
Yeah, so this is I think really important because when you're talking about these people who maybe don't know anything, maybe a bit arrogant, just want to tear people down, sometimes those people will have been your parents.
Yeah.
Sometimes those people would have been a teacher who didn't like you or an ex who also was triggered by something about you or a person in your class or whatever. Um, they're not infallible sources of information, and this applies even to your inner voices. There are so many people again who are like, well, my inner voice is telling me the truth about everything, like that's my conscience, or that's like, my the beam that connects me to the objective reality of the world. It's not, it's an opinion. And in the same way that when you're describing being in a room and getting a bunch of feedback and you think, okay, these are a bunch of opinions and some of them are good and some of them are bad, this is also the way that we need to approach our internal monologues.
Yeah.
We're getting a bunch of voices chucking opinions at us, and some of them are good, and some of them are bad, and some of them are real, and some of them are not. In the same way that we have to talk ourselves down when we're very, very anxious, we're excessively anxious, we also need to understand that the voices around our worth can tend in totally different directions, and that probably the truth is somewhere in the middle, or at the very least, we want to act as if the truth is in the middle until we've assessed all the opinions that are coming in. So this kind of self-talk is definitely something that you might want to look at if you are having problems with your self-worth, to think about the messages that you're sending yourself all the time, the things that you're telling yourself. Sometimes even the voices those things are coming in, because you may realize that the person who says, Jesus, you can't go out the house wearing that, is actually your mum's voice, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, and some cases like your parents are toxic or like your sister's toxic or your girlfriend is toxic to you. And being able to sort of objectively assess that or even just being like, I think this is a bad thing to have in my life right now.
Sure.
Like, but I think this is having like real negative impacts on my mental health or on this or on that. Like, that's a really important realization to have. But you have to understand that like these people are not authoritative. And once you start to
Mm,
disregard everyone's opinion as authoritative, then you get to test them for the sort of competition of ideas or competition of value. And sometimes, we go back to the American culture. Like sometimes Americans are just like, yeah, they're super excited about their kids and their parents are overhyping their kids and you
mm,
can do this, Billy, and you're going to achieve great things. But sometimes that's all that it takes in order for someone to believe they can achieve great things, and then they go do it. And it's not to say that
mm,
it's not luck involved. There's not a lot of things involved, But having somebody tell you that versus having somebody like, you're never going to achieve anything is an entirely different experience. And you,
For sure.
one of those things is like really holding you back as a fucking rock that you're chained to. The other thing is like it might be a booster that propels you on to good stuff, but it's certainly much better for your mental health to think that you can achieve great stuff than to be like, oh, I'm worthless. I'm never going to achieve anything.
I knew of a client years ago. Um, who this is a client of a friend, and this person was actually pretty successful in work, but really struggled with things in their personal life. I mean, just practical stuff as well as emotional relationship stuff. And at a certain point, their therapist said to them, "Why are you so confident in work?" Because their job was quite hard.
Mhm.
Why are you so confident at work, but you're not confident in this stuff? What's the difference between these two realms? Your work life is way harder. And this person said, well, nobody ever told me that I couldn't do that. And I thought, yeah, okay. And actually now a lot of the research suggests that talking to children, what actually has the best benefit is praising stuff like their effort, praising their resilience.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
not about their success, not about you can do it and even, but just about I love that you're really trying to do it. I love that you're really making an effort to do it. I love seeing you focus on it and concentrate on it because again, it's about the ability that you have is not really the thing you're trying to do. It's the ability to adapt and learn and try again.
Undertake the process. Try and improve the process where you can. Sometimes the process isn't adapted to you. It's sort of a generalist process, but you have a better way to go about it if you understand your learning needs. And then understand you don't always control the results. And some things are out of your control and you have to accept that in life. Like some
Mm,
things will fail because it rained on that day and you just weren't prepared for that or something horribly outside of your realm of knowledge came in and interrupted the flow. Um,
mm.
and that's just life. And understanding that life has a significant degree of randomness is horrible for people. We fucking hate that. You want to feel in control of all things all the time.
Mm.
And understanding complexity and that many things are not in your control is soul shriveling stuff.
This is why arrogance is a recipe for getting your shit rocked. Because things are going to happen that knock you off your stride. Even if everybody in your life around you is committed to this insane worldview that you have, weird stuff is going to happen. And so if you are super, super arrogant, you're either going to have catastrophic failure where you're going to have no choice but to recognize it, or you're going to become increasingly detached from reality
Mhm.
as you try and block out all the bad stuff that points to how bad your premises are, I guess.
I think going back to the fact that like social media is a tear down space and so much of the world
Mm,
is a tear down space. I had a conversation with my therapist just recently where I actually had to go in and I was talking about some stuff I've been really working really hard on. So I went through this breakup and the breakup in the ways that many people will sort of heal from it or get through it I rejected. I wanted nothing to do with that because like I want to remember everything in sort of as pristine objective terms as I can because that's how my brain operates. And in many cases people will start to reject the good parts of it and then try to keep the bad parts so that they can detach themselves, which I understand. I totally get that. But I didn't want to do that. But I didn't know if I could get to a spot where I had grace and acceptance around this via my own way, which is
mm,
keeping all of it and still having it be accessible to me. Because my brain is, I have very great memory. That's one of the few good traits that I have. And it's also very, I can do connective. So it's hyper connective and I can touch things together, which means that I can get triggered by anything at any time because
mhm,
like it's all connected together in one spot and it's never just like one path to get to a memory. And so the question for me was like, over time, can I keep all of this in what I think is a beautiful state and remember it as lovely and then get to the point where I feel like I can move on or accept everything that happened. And
mhm,
I was like, I don't know if I can. And then this past week, I was like, I'm actually really proud of myself because I feel like I landed here and I feel like I have a real sense of grace about this. And I've gotten to the point where I would be in almost like a negotiation in business where I'm okay with however this turns out now. Like I understand all of this, and
mm.
this side is weighted this way, and this side is weighted that way. and I'm all right with all of that. And my therapist looks at me at the end of the conversation and she's like, that's actually kind of incredible. And you should feel like so happy with yourself and proud of yourself because I said, I think the most challenging thing was, I do have a lot of self-confidence, but I didn't know if I could do this thing because of one, I've never had like a really bad breakup from my side where I was horribly heartbroken and I fucked it up myself and all the above. But more so that I didn't know if I could get to a spot where I wouldn't be sad about things all the time and sad thinking about these things all the time because I want to hold it. I don't want to get rid of it. I don't want to jettison. I don't want to pack it away. And I think I finally got there. And going into the unknown was like the really terrifying thing because I knew what worked for other people and I've read a ton about how to do this better. But much like, the rest of my life, I had to find my own way to do it. What I found remarkable though about all of this, and I'm not trying to like toot my own horn, I'm still not, there'll be bad days, but she was the one telling me that I should be proud. And I kind of wanted to reject her telling me that
Mm,
what a good job this was. Because I feel like in no place in the world do we have a space outside of your parents where somebody can tell you how proud they are, like what a good job. Maybe you have a partner or a friend that can do that. But so much of the rest of the world is about the negativity and why it's not good enough. And then I had this person that understands me quite well at this point saying
mm,
actually that's great. And I was like, oh, I'm sure other people do this stuff all the time. You just package it away,
hmm.
like bat it away, don't take praise, don't take this. And yeah, I felt that was like a pretty strong metaphor for what everybody goes through all the time and why self-worth and self-confidence is often such a challenge for folks.
Mm. That's interesting because I wonder if that happens to you in other parts of life as well, whether it feels vulnerable to be praised in that way, to accept, to be proud, or to be told you should be proud by somebody else. I don't know. Is there something there about you can praise yourself, but other people's praise feels uncomfortable?
I always find compliments difficult to accept.
Mm, okay.
I try and find an objective level for myself, but I find compliments challenging. And that's why the thing about if you're dating somebody that's attractive and they compliment you on something, like you're just like, ooh, wow, I'm gonna try and hold on to that and sit in it
Mm,
for a bit because it's so unusual. And then you get pretty people that like never take on the compliments despite the fact that they're objectively gorgeous because like it was a thing that they learned to tune out or it happened so often that it
sure.
became
Yeah, yeah.
devalued.
Hmm. Okay. So without turning this into a therapy session, like, entirely, it's it's interesting to wonder what the core belief is there, to wonder what prevents you from attaching really to somebody's compliment in certain, I guess, in certain parts of life. Um, for you, again, to avoid turning it into just a therapy session, for some people it might be that it gives that person then a bit of power. If they can give me recognition, then they could also take away recognition, and I'd
Mhm.
rather be self-contained. For some people it might be that their experience is of getting praise that was meant to manipulate them in some way or wasn't fully meant or something. Like there are these parts of life which have shaped us and which then do affect the way that we construct our worth, I suppose. I'm not putting this very well today, but
No, I think a lot of people have
yeah.
a problem with accepting compliments, right?
Hmm.
Like, and they need to like really sort of marinate in it. And this is a vector that I wasn't expecting it from, but it's also somebody that's like a therapist that has a lot of exposure to other people, and I'm not sure that they would necessarily say it. But even if they did want to just say it out of the blue, I could then test it against what I think I know or not and be like, oh yeah, okay, that fits
Mm.
or that doesn't. And in this particular case, I came in saying like I was proud of myself, and then she just like, reflected it back to me saying that you should be
Mm.
because you did it your own way, and that seemed to be really hard for you, and maybe it's really hard for anybody, which is sort of what she was suggesting, and that's fine. But I think it's metaphorical for like what everybody goes through, which is that we've got to find some better ways inside of ourselves of objectively evaluating where you're at, blocking out the noise, and then plotting a path of progress and adapting and adjusting as you go. And once you become comfortable with that, like you can go from zero, which I have been in a number of jobs where I ended up achieving great things, to very high levels via relative level of self-confidence and really hard work.
I really want to keep quizzing you on this in this area. Because yeah, lots of people do struggle to take compliments, but you are quite happy to notice these things about yourself, but when somebody else notices it and points it out to you, it feels and it's so funny that you go in and you say, I'm proud, and then she says, you should be proud, and you think, oh God, like go take that away from me. Like that's really interesting. But
It's great. I'll take that and work on it over the next coming weeks, and we'll report back on accepting compliments in a future episode.
yeah, but it's
Are you good at it? Because you love to have people talk about you, but are you good at accepting other people's compliments?
Not really. No,
Uh-huh.
no. But I think I have quite low self-worth. It's
Really?
yeah, I can take compliments more if they relate to my abilities than if they relate to my qualities. So when people say I'm good at a thing, I'm normally reasonably good at saying, well, I know if I'm good at that thing or if I'm not. But when it's about who I am, like the kind of person I am, I really struggle with that stuff. I don't like it. It feels too vulnerable to accept it. It's a thing I work on. Like I sit there and I force myself to do it. I
Mhm.
always think about this woman who was kind of like a surrogate grandmother to me when I was a kid. And I remember one time she was like, I must have been 6 or something. And she tried to give me a fiver. And at the time I was like, holy shit, Like when you're a kid, love at first sight is like the first time that you hold paper money, I think.
Yep.
Um,
Someone bribing you. My
yeah, and
my the grandmother I'm named after.
oh really?
Mm.
Um, was it Theodora or Dorothy?
Theodora.
Okay.
She was
'Cause
named Teddy.
same thing, gift of God. Oh, that's really cute. Yeah, so I remember she tried to give me this money and I was like, no, 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 like trying to like politely be like, oh no, no, before I was like, yes, please give me the money. And after I said no twice, she was like, you should learn that when someone's trying to give you something nice, that actually the polite thing to do is accept it graciously.
Mhm.
And so I remember that when someone gives me a compliment and I'm just like, oh no, like please, please, please. But I struggle with it.
When your partner or when someone you love kind of gets that sour milk face after you've given them a compliment, it's not that they're reacting negatively to you.
Yeah.
They're reacting negatively to themselves and their own self-image of whether they deserve that. And
Mm,
sometimes like what you really want to do is you want to stop them and say, I love you with all of my heart. I accept all of you. And I see this in you. I want you to take this because I
mm.
mean it for real. And man, that has like just this golden moment. It's like something fucking opens up in the heavens. There are chimes behind you of like, major chords. And they're like, oh, okay. Like if it's right. And some people just are damaged in ways that like they can't do it. And
Mm,
that's tough. Even though like it's so obvious from everybody around them when they interact with them, they're like, wow, you have these amazing qualities
mm.
and people love it. And that is comes back to self-worth as well. So
Yeah.
it's it's a challenging topic and it comes from all different vectors that ruin you. But what we're trying to do is find vectors that help you improve at it and feel comfortable that you have value, that you are worthy of praise, and that you are worthy of love.
Well, and the important thing to do here is not to get to some magical point where it's all fine, but yeah, to learn the process of how you deal with it, to try and avoid some comparison when it doesn't really help you, to try and tune out the voices when you've looked at them and you understand that actually those don't accurately represent the situation, to look at your own strengths, to look at your own weaknesses, and just have a process to work through this stuff because a lot of us are just out here like raw dogging it and hoping that it'll all work out. And this kind of stuff is difficult and is kind of new. There are loads
Yeah.
of these problems that we're having where previously, humans were too focused on getting food to think about this shit. So so we're all just trying to like I guess to plow our own new furrows here and it's difficult stuff.
Back to the sort of example topic.
Yeah.
Like, what did you love about that? And was there anything that felt uncomfortable? Because I know you and I often have sort of overlapping opinions on things, having come from entirely different places at the start, and also like being different generations. Like we're basically, I view generations as like 10 years, and we're basically a generation apart.
So we're talking about the newsletter and okay.
Just
So
reacting to football, like where people are resistant, particularly resistant to change, which is often why and don't like outsiders.
in a way, I have advantages here. Like in the I don't have your accent, and also I don't really need to convince anybody at this point. You know, you're like, I don't need to go and sell myself to people in clubs. Like when you talked about marketing, I don't really have to do that. People are going to
Mhm.
listen to me or they're not. And to be honest, when someone's like, you're arrogant, that is preferable to the kind of feedback I got in the early days
So this is
on
hilarious for
YouTube.
those of you who are watching because Patrick doesn't have my job inside of our company that Patrick participates in, which is Patrick does not have to market himself. I have
Yeah,
to market
exactly.
Patrick. And so
Look,
so
I'm the
he's like,
product,
I don't
baby.
care about that. Like, and I'm like, well, I give a shit all the time. So
Sure, but like, but again, you know how it makes you worse as a product to worry about it too much. I don't know. I've now kind of got to the point where I think the people who I value like care about the stuff that I care about, and the people who don't care about that can go fuck themselves. Like that's honestly how I feel. And working now on the transfer flow, in I'm exposed much more to people who are willing to consider my opinion dispassionately than I was when I was working for a colossal YouTube channel that was aimed at a younger audience, where
Mhm.
you did just get more people who happened to click on a video. So I liked though that you went and wrote this newsletter about it because I felt like it really summed up a lot of my feeling, which is go and look at my track record if you've really got this much of an issue. Like go and look at how he actually approached these things. There's endless stuff of me talking about my failures and talking about my fuck ups, and you can't really hurt me in this area because I know what I offer and what I don't. um so I'm also perfectly happy because I start from the point of view that I don't know that much. Like as in working with the transfer flow, I'm an amateur and I'm working with people who actually do this stuff professionally. You know, you or Ravi or whoever it is, like Hayden. And so I'm constantly in a position of identifying the stuff that I don't know and then
Mhm.
going away and trying to learn about it. So if someone says to me, you don't know about this thing, I think, do you think that I'm unaware of that? Or do you think that I'm scared of acknowledging that? I've already noticed that. I see it happening in the course of the podcast. And so yeah, when people call me arrogant, I think at this point I know who I am and it doesn't really bother me too much.
I'm so conscious of the deterioration of my level of expertise. And also I'm conscious of my ability to re-engage that expertise. So for two years, 2 solid years in StatsBomb, like I basically devoted all of my life to American football.
Hmm.
I watched Arsenal games and that was it. I had nothing to do with it. Now, this is a person for the previous 20 years had been steeped in everything football and had done
Hmm.
professional gambling and just all of the works. I've been inside professional teams. And much like my gambling on football, like I went away from it and then I came back to it. I'm like, can I still do this? And the whole conceit of variance betting was, can I still do this? And
Hmm.
I'm gonna put this out there. Maybe a few people will pay for it, and we'll do this experiment through the course of the season. And you'll get access to my picks, my gambling picks. And if I'm as good as I used to be, then this will be a very good return and this information will have value. And if not, you will see me crash and burn, and hopefully it'll be entertaining for you as well.
Yeah.
So like I'm okay with either of these outcomes. I'll be pissed about one of them, but I'll be okay with it in the end because I've accepted it as a premise walking through the door.
Hmm.
And that was obviously quite interesting. And I did it with American football twice. Like I went away from college football, stopped betting on it, came back to it, held like 10%, which is awesome. Like if you hold 10% per bet, like your ROI is unbelievable. Um, and so like I've done this a couple times in my life, but I also know that every season is updated information. And every season
Yeah.
may be a new set of players that are available, or this guy got an ACL injury, or this guy isn't working out in this system, or this guy's coming available, or he's come from Japan where, we have information, but like we don't really trust whether Japanese players can come into a league and be good
Hmm.
from the start. So there's this whole breadth of stuff where you've got to really keep on top of it in order to be an expert. And there are times that, the gambling really powers expertise because I'm deep inside of it. I'm forced in a monetary way
Hmm.
and a predictive way to stay engaged with it. But if I didn't, like my life is busy and there's lots of stuff going on. And so I would probably step away from it. And so I'm very, very aware that anytime that we're not kind of keeping on top of stuff, like it will erode quickly and other people can do better. And sometimes that's also a level of expertise. I have a question for you. With your friends, not with your children, but with your friends, because your children are a little too young, do you regularly say, I don't have an opinion on that, or like, I don't know enough about that to have an opinion?
I'm trying to do it more. I'm trying to do it more.
Okay.
I That's the thing I've always struggled with. And actually, my dad and one friend of mine, this friend Emma, I said to her the other day, the thing I admire most about you is that you will just say, I don't know anything about that, and you're not worried that it will make you look stupid. And she's, she was at Oxford a little time after me, and she's like, she's really smart, like she's highly educated, um, and it doesn't affect her perception of herself to say I don't know. Whereas I've always struggled with that, but also I'm more of a generalist than she is, so I don't know. It kind of feels like that's my strength.
Okay. I I've gotten to that point years ago where the deeper I have to go into certain topics, the less I know about the
Mm,
breadth of the world. But I am. But like once you have kids, like you just have to admit that like I know
yeah,
fuck all about most movies for like a decade. Like just
sure.
barely saw anything that wasn't Postman Pat and Paw Patrol. And so you then start to get comfortable with it, like, oh, I don't know anything about these things anymore. And I try to be very upfront about, do you know about XYZ? But that again is a level of self-confidence to say, I don't have enough information to have a useful opinion on that.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's a great place to be in. And in fact, if people know a lot about it, they often get engaged and excited about teaching you about it. Whether you
Hmm.
want that teaching, maybe you don't, maybe you do. But
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it's another way to just go about the world and say, I'm not expected to know everything about everything. It's totally fine. The areas that I do know a lot, I can be confident that I can have conversations about and educate other people in some cases. And the areas that I don't, I'm either happy to accept information back because I want to learn and I always like learning, or I don't really have any interest in that. Maybe we could talk about something else.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's a the thing I like about therapy in this way is that therapy constantly forces you to not know. Like this is a thing that they talk about all the time in therapy that you have to sit there and not know and be okay with it
Yeah.
and resist as well, clients who obviously quite often want you to just explain what's going on with them. You've got to accept that you can't give that, and sometimes you've got to say to them, I'm not holding out on you. Like, I don't have the special information here. I'm sitting with you and like we're going through it at the same time. Um,
There are
that's a
times I don't know about myself, right?
oh,
So how could you
most of the
possibly
time
know?
I'd say that, for me, but yeah, in therapy, you're like, it is the antidote to thinking that you have the solution in every situation. Because also that is 100% when clients can tell that you're full of shit. When you try and come up with some neat explanation, or when you're kind of like, I don't know, forcing them into a box of like this thing that you read in the last week that now you're seeing everywhere. That's when clients know that you're full of shit, and that's when you get called arrogant. So
So a little bit of this comes back to how we talk and perceive ourselves. So
yeah.
talk about and perceive ourselves. Let's give a couple of tips on like how to rebuild this for yourself before we wrap up this topic, because I know that this really matters. And therapy is a place that we can talk about, but you don't have to be in therapy in order to address like your self-talk and listen
Hmm.
to your self-talk. And I know, acknowledging your strengths is something you've been coaching about. But then there's this other bit about setting boundaries, which I think that it often gets abandoned or is only in therapy space when people, or you hear it about like incessantly on the TikTok culture, but you don't even know what setting boundaries even means. So,
Hmm. Yeah, so setting boundaries, this obviously relates to other people, but I think that if you can practice doing it, it creates a little feedback loop within yourself. So, for example, let's think of something good here. Say you've got a friend who always talks down to you a little bit.
mhm.
Like they're nice to you, but it's always kind of a little bit, oh, look at him. He's so sweet. He's so young and innocent, like that kind of stuff or whatever. Or, oh, well, you'll know what it's like when you have kids. Any of this kind of stuff. It can be well-meaning, but if you don't like it, saying to that person, when you say this, I don't really like it. It actually makes me feel distant from you. That can be incredibly hard. But if you're willing to do that, then it's you saying, I refuse to be seen in this particular way. by pushing back on that, you are sending yourself a positive message as well, which is
Or
I'm
you're writing
actually
a newsletter, like,
sure.
pointing out that people said this shit and being like,
Yeah.
I don't accept it. And in fact, this is my resume and uh, I'm going to stand by this.
Yeah, and then
Exact same parallel.
and then you're putting it down on paper. You'll have to argue it. You're actually having to sort of, get litigious about it and really, really make the argument. And so when you're talking to this person, especially if this is a long-standing relationship and they've had this habit for a while, then you've got to say, you do realize that when you talk this way, it kind of implies that you know better than me, or it implies that I'm innocent or stupid, or it makes me feel like you're saying you know better than me, or like you're yourself in a maternal position, or whatever it might be. When you start going into this stuff, then you will also start to realize what part of you it's triggering. And I think then you can easily work back from there to saying to yourself, I actually should not be patronized. I actually should have an equal say in this relationship. I do know things about the world. So even just the process of setting a simple boundary with somebody saying a thing that you don't like, I think has really positive effects. And I've seen this with clients. I've seen clients who have, there's been something that a friend of theirs has done or a family member has done that's pissed them off, and they've psyched themselves up to say something. And after they've said that thing, not only does it change that relationship, sometimes not always for the better, but it does change the relationship, but it also makes them realize that they object to this view of themselves. They object to it. And that is an assertion of value. That is an
Yeah.
assertion of something different. And I think, of course, as well, it teaches you that you can argue with somebody about something, which, if you're a people pleaser, is a very important piece of information to have.
Some friends that you have are also the English opinion journalist, where they never take a stand on anything until after the fact.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
They never stand in front of an event and say, this is what you should do ahead of time. They only criticize the contra outcome after the fact. And
Mm,
so they can play both sides whenever they want to. If somebody had set up tactically and it worked out well for them, they'd be like, oh, he was brilliant in this way. If they set up tactically and in the exact same way and it didn't work out for them, they say, oh, he was an idiot in this way. And they
hmm
never have to say, you should set up tactically in this way and this will be the thing that happens. They're never actually putting themselves on the line. They're just putting words on a fucking page. Some
Yeah.
of your friends will be exactly like this. They can they can sit in hindsight and criticize any single thing about everything in the whole fucking world, but they never actually have to get in front of a thing and make a choice and be predictive about it. Or they do, and you look and you're like, your life is a mess. How do you even have these opinions about everybody else? Like, I don't
Mm.
understand. But maybe it's because they're not constantly testing for objectivity and trying to find a better path.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the it's easier to run for office than to be in office idea, right? Like it's very easy to say, look at these dickheads, they're ruining everything, and it's actually quite hard to say, this is how we're going to do things, this is how we're going to run stuff.
Well, it
So
was true about the Tories, and unfortunately, it seems to also be true a little bit about Labor.
it's true about basically everyone,
Yeah.
but I think that yeah, this is part of it, recognizing people who are motivated by something other than wanting to give you honest, constructive feedback. People who are motivated by wanting to win arguments or who get a kick out of tearing you down because it builds them up. This sort of stuff as well. It's a good place to set boundaries. And that's all really a boundary is. It's saying that stuff over there is yours. Don't infect me with it. I'm drawing a line here and it doesn't get to come over that line. Like
At
that is all it is.
at some point, we should talk about people whose favorite thing to do in conversations is to play devil's advocate,
Hmm.
because those people drive me crazy.
But I think those people just think that it makes them sound intelligent, and
Yeah.
maybe it does to dipshits, but ultimately I don't care about those people. Again,
To me, it makes them combative, and it makes things seem like, yes, honestly, having your own opinion is great, but if you're always playing devil's advocate and that's
Mhm,
how you have conversations, like that doesn't seem compounding. That seems to be taking things away. And I
sure.
like situations where you can have, like, you're not playing zero sum games, you're playing compound long term games, and
Hmm.
that's the type of thing that I like. And so I think that's why those types of people irritate me. But again, boundary settings and the types and ways people have conversations with yourself. And then the other thing is boundary setting with yourself and how you talk about yourself and how you talk to yourself.
Sure. Yeah. a lot of people have the habit of being self-deprecating, right? I mean, a lot of people have it as a way of forging connection with people, and I think that's okay. But if
Mhm.
you're doing it all the time, then chances are it's defensive. And again, these we are what we repeatedly do, right? If you say this stuff about yourself all the time, well, actually, I'm not that good at that, or actually, well, oh, this thing that I cooked for you turned out well this time, but the five other times I've done it, it was dog shit. Like, there's no need to do this. There's no need to do this. You can recognize your wins, and your wins are not devalued by the fact that there are failures before them. In fact, you should praise yourself for overcoming those failures, making improvements, and learning to do something better. That is a wonderful quality. That is a much more important quality. But if you're doing this all the time as well, it does make you, in the end, I think, quite unattractive to be around because people don't want to see you drag yourself down, especially if they love you. It can be very exhausting to love somebody who's always talking badly about themselves because you
Absolutely.
think, what does it say about me that I think you're so wonderful if you're such a piece of shit?
And you're not. And this is this is where you're trying to guide them to get to a place that resonates with the rest of the world. You're not a piece of shit. You're this
Yeah.
wonderful person. I'm sorry that your mother constantly harped on like how worthless you were or didn't treat
Mm,
you with love because that's where you ended up as your self-image. But regardless of what happened back then as a child, like you didn't turn into that person. So we need to update your priors and your personal viewpoint as to like what a great person you are.
hmm
Because look around you. If you were to ask all of us, we would not be blowing smoke up your ass to say that you're a wonderful, great person and we all love you a great deal.
hmm I'm now just imagining that you're talking to me. Like this is the thing. I zone out the quotation marks when you're talking like this, and I just assume that it's just I. Rishi, can we just clip all this so that we can put it out on social media? Just like long takes of Ted praising me, I think would be really great. I don't know. I feel like we've covered a lot of stuff in this area. Like we could probably go indefinitely on this, but then we just start calling out people who annoy us. And I feel like at certain points it's like perilously close to us being like, and this person's a prick, and this person's a prick. But we would be right to do that.
I labeled the whole of English journalism already, and actually the entire country. So I think that I'm sort of in the shitter with regard to all that. But no, I
That's
think
fine.
that this conversation ended up being quite windy and meandering in
Mm,
ways that starts out this incident that I had some pushback on for objective reasons, and there are lots of reasons why no one is going to praise you in the internet space. So you need to kind of
mm,
praise yourself and like don't be a dick about it. But if you can be objective and stand on top of it and be like, hey, this is where I'm at and this is all the evidence, like feel comfortable about it. And people will take shots at you, but that's the fucking internet. That like that being part of it. And then we get to all right, so beyond that, like how do you have self-confidence? Why do you have
mm,
self-confidence?
mm,
What sort of structure are you building to find objective ways to evaluate your skill and your knowledge in places that are not reliant on outside voices that are constantly trying to tear you down? And then the final bit is checking back in to make sure that you are one, talking to and about yourself in ways that are useful. Also, setting boundaries with people that might be tearing you down, even in your own personal life, and say that, "Hi, I love you. I value our relationship, but like this isn't comfortable for me, and I don't really appreciate like the way that you say these things because when you say them, it makes me feel right. You're
mm,
not like you're trying to find ways to gentle it, but also to set that very gentle but firm boundary that says that
mm,
this isn't okay. And then if you have all of these things kind of in place and start to put them into your life, you can build self confidence and you can be comfortable in your self worth. And it doesn't have to be arrogance.
yeah.
But some cultures will try and chisel away saying that you're arrogant, even by simply being objective about what you have achieved.
I think that's a really good summary, and I think that I'm intrigued to hear what our listeners and viewers think of this stuff because if you are on YouTube, for example, you probably are exposed to a lot of stuff that is trying to infect your feelings about yourself in these areas. At some point, I think we have to talk about social media more broadly, but certainly it plays an enormous part in this stuff now. But yeah, I think we could have gone for like 3 hours on this, Ted.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for listening. Subscribe, like, tell your friends, and give us feedback. As you can tell, we love feedback. We do episodes entirely built around feedback. And Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. Say goodbye to the nice people, Patrick.
Bye bye. Sorry, so you were saying there's different porn available to torrent than to stream? Sure.
You're like a dog with this bone right here.
Well, is that the porn that you're
Yeah.
downloading?
Didn't the rationalists have like a discussion about bestiality recently? And I was just like, how did we even? And then I just didn't care, and thankfully didn't pay any attention. Yes, you should. My opinion is that you should be VPNing and downloading porn as opposed to streaming it. That is my general opinion.
hmm
And it's been that way for since the dawn of torrents, effectively.
What? So people don't know
Because
what you're accessing?
yeah, well, partly it's anonymized, partly it's that like things are available. I'm not averse to paying for porn. That's also like a thing that I think you probably should support your favorite porn stars. Um, but yeah, like I just download the torrent sites because that's what humans do, I thought. But also like I did try streaming stuff and I was like, this is irritating and you'll get ads that pop up in the middle of it. Anyway, it's
I've never
yeah,
had ads pop
the
up in the
user
middle.
experience. Hmm, okay.
Maybe I have a
Maybe.
maybe I have a better membership than you.
Also true. But yeah, yeah,
Pun
and
not
like you
intended.
actually you get the same search terms and things just load up, but like there's more history and eh, this is my general opinion. I just like whatever you're into, the internet has it, but I'm much more of the archetype that says that also do pay for like tons of subscriptions, like but and I'm fine with people paying for porn, but I would much rather torrent things anyway.
hmm
City keeps spending and all these various elements that Rio is deeply unqualified to have conversations about.
What is he qualified to have conversations about?
Well,
If
this is
like,
exactly it.
this is the thing. There's one time ever I've seen Rio Ferdinand say something interesting, and it was when he was talking about like there was a cross coming in, and he like criticized a defender, and someone said, "Well, what should you be doing that?" And he talked about what you actually do if you're a good defender, and I was like, "Oh yeah, Rio, stay in your lane, and you actually sound like you know what you're talking about because you were in fact an amazing fucking defender, but you are a terrible person and a moron."
I don't know about the person element, but his intellect about topics outside of his wheelhouse seems to be problematic.